Good afternoon and welcome to Opinion Journal. I'm Mary Kissel. You're looking at scenes from the protests in Istanbul in this past days, which have been ongoing now for a lot longer than that government thought they would run. American Enterprise Institute scholar John Bolton is here to talk about what this all means. John, is this shades of the Arab Spring?
Well, I think it comes from a very different direction, actually. This is a protest with a lot of causes, I think, but one that shines through is a resistance, maybe mostly by Turkey's middle class, to Prime Minister Erdogan's campaign to Islamicize Turkish society. What Erdogan has been trying to do essentially is reverse the settlement after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire broke up and Mustafa Kemal tried to create a secular Turkish state, which has worked very well for the Turks in the 90-plus years since that happened. Erdogan has a different view. He's been trying to pack the judiciary with sympathizers to his point of view. He's been trying to take over the military. And increasingly, he's been imposing this strict Islamic legal interpretation on civil society. And a lot of this, I think, is a reaction to that. So, in fact, it's very different from much of the Arab Spring, which had a heavy Islamicist component.
Well, Erdogan has also gone after journalists, too, very heavy-handed. He's been in power for many years now. Can he survive protests like this, or should we expect a more serious crackdown in the coming days?
Well, he's cracked down pretty heavily in the initial days, and in fact, at least some observers think that may have provoked even more people to go into the streets because of the harshness of the crackdown. But I don't think Erdogan's going to back down on this. Remember, before he became prime minister, he once said, "Democracy is like a streetcar. You ride it to the stop you want, and then you get off." And I think the Turks heard that, and they're not so happy with that idea.
Well, I wouldn't be happy with that either. Now, this isn't just an isolated incident, of course. We've got upheaval across the broader Middle East, Syria in particular. Do you think that this upheaval in Syria is seeping into Turkey and is also complicating matters here for Erdogan?
Well, I think it's made maintenance of order in Turkey much harder. You have maybe 1 million plus Syrian refugees have come across the border since the Syrian civil war broke out. The Kurds in Syria have effectively declared independence. Even at the same time, Erdogan has been trying to make a deal with the most radical Turkish Kurdish faction, the PKK. This idea of an independent Kurdish state, whether it's in Iraq or Turkey or Syria, wherever, the Kurds have never given up on it. And so there are a variety of stresses that I think Erdogan is feeling, and this latest from his own basic Turkish population, much of his base apparently, has got to be concerning to him.
John, a long-time Middle Eastern observers are starting to see what they call, the beginning of a long war, sectarian violence throughout the region by these various Sunni and Shia Alawite groups. Do you agree with that analysis?
Well, I think the prospect is there. I think the civil war in Syria has increasingly become a proxy war between Iran and the large Shia bloc on the one hand, and its offshoots like the Alawites of the Assad family dictatorship, and the Sunnis on the other. Now, I don't think that's inevitable. You know the saying in the Middle East, I against my brother and I against our cousin, all of us against the stranger. So it doesn't mean that the Middle East will fragment into two discrete blocks. I think there's a lot of complication. But I do think there's a bigger point, and that is consistent with what you've said. The Middle East itself is getting increasingly chaotic. Strategic stability is disappearing. Each of these individual crises, Syria, Libya, Yemen, you name it, really risk throwing the entire region into turmoil. And with Iran increasingly close to nuclear weapons, I think this is a very, very serious period that honestly the United States is not paying anywhere near adequate attention to.
The United States not paying any attention
to much of anything outside the country.
Despite President Obama's friendship with Erdogan.